Scripture reading this morning is from Deuteronomy chapter 26, verses 1 through 11, a passage that I think will be familiar to a lot of us and speaks of harvest time. When you have come into the land that the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance to possess, and you possess it and settle in it, you shall take some of the first of all the fruit of the ground, which you harvest from the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and you shall put it in a basket, and go to the place that the Lord your God will choose as a dwelling for his name. You shall go to the priest who is in office at the time and say to him, "Today I declare to the Lord your God that I have come into the land that the Lord swore to our ancestors to give us." When the priest takes the basket from your hand and sets it down before the altar of the Lord your God, you shall make this response before the Lord your God. "A wandering Aramean was my ancestor. He went down into Egypt and lived there as an alien, few in number, and there he became a great nation, mighty and populous. When the Egyptians treated us harshly and afflicted us by imposing hard labor on us, we cried to the Lord, the God of our ancestors. The Lord heard our voice and saw our affliction, our toil, and our oppression. The Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, with a terrifying display of power and with signs and wonders. And he brought us into this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. So now I bring the first of the fruit of the ground that you, O Lord, have given me. You shall set it down before the Lord your God and bow down before the Lord your God. Then you, together with the Levites and the aliens who reside among you, shall celebrate with all the bounty that the Lord your God has given to you and to your house." And reading from Philippians chapter 4, verses 4 through 9. Again, a familiar passage. "Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say, rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to everyone. The Lord is near. Do not worry about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which passes all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, beloved, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, and if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Keep on doing the things that you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, and the God of peace will be with you." Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church.
Thanks, Sharon. Will you join with me in a word of prayer? Loving God, as we reflect on how rich the blessings are that we have received in the life that we have, we offer this moment of reflection. What goes on in our hearts and minds, the words that are said. We pray that through the activity of your Spirit, all of this might result in lives of thanksgiving, lives of generosity, through your grace. Amen. Well, sermon writing and other kinds of creative writing, it's always a combination of things that goes on. And they they come from a variety of places, these ideas that end up being spoken in this place. So, some of it is original thought, believe it or not. And then some of it's borrowed thought. Haven't quite figured out how to give it back to the people I borrowed it from, but some of it's referenced thought. And some of it is just tapping into the millions of ideas and events that are in the public domain and have, by some mystery of God, been caught in the net of my mind. I often struggle to know what came to me and what got tucked away in my brain from someone else, only to pop up this week, or what is actually a thought that I actually had myself. Well, squirreled away in there somewhere is a story of a time when James McNeill Whistler made a particularly brilliant remark in the hearing of Oscar Wilde, who had a reputation for borrowing other people's ideas. And when Oscar Wilde heard Whistler's really clever remark, he immediately commented, "I wish I'd said that." To which Whistler replied, "You will, Oscar. You will." Well, I remember doing some reading a while ago, and I came across a brilliant little phrase about Thanksgiving, and I remember thinking to myself, gee, I wish I'd said that. And this little voice spoke into my ear, "Well, you will, Willie boy. One day you will." And so today the prophecy comes to fruition. I am not sure where this quote came from, but here it is. "Thank God I've had the vinegar in teaspoonfuls and the honey in a ladle." Thank God I've had the vinegar in teaspoonfuls and the honey in a ladle. In other words, thank God the sweetness outweighs the sour. If there ever were words for this Thanksgiving Sunday, those would be them. Because as I was thinking about what Ali was about to do, thinking about all the things for which I am thankful in my life, as we're all thinking about that when she put it to us, I got to say that my list has a whole lot of honey and not a lot of vinegar. And yet wisdom would tell us that every life needs both. Rain falls on the just and the unjust alike, but it rains on all of us. You see, the people of Israel were going through a bit of an exercise, much like we have been in our reading this morning. Every year at harvest time, they would come to their place of worship and offer the first fruits of the harvest. They would offer the very best, the cream of the crop, the creme de la creme, the honey of it all. And it was not simply that they were giving thanks for the rich harvest of the year, but they were remembering where they'd come from, remembering all of those events of their life, some of which was sweet and some of which were bitter. From the bitterness of slavery in Egypt through their wanderings in the wilderness was a real mix, to the arrival in the land flowing with milk and honey. Their life had certainly not been all honey, but it had not also been all vinegar. And they were now able to present the first fruits before their God and give thanks. A mingling, as they told the story, of honey and vinegar. And in all these things, the best of it all had been that God had been with them through all of it. And so they brought their thanks to God. The first fruits. And it's pretty obvious that, like everyone's life, there's going to be some vinegar and there's going to be some honey. And it's going to come in varying proportions. Interesting. What is vinegar to one person may also be honey to another. A variation on the theme which will emerge next Saturday: one person's trash is another person's treasure. Bet you were wondering when I was going to be able to slip in a flea market reference into this whole thing. Yeah. But even when we think about the origins of Thanksgiving, we know that the same event may be experienced differently for different people. You think about the beginnings of, Canada, it's not about pilgrims or anything. The first Thanksgiving that is recorded historically is Martin Frobisher, having made it through an ill-fated voyage in, I think it was 1578, declared Thanksgiving gratitude and a worship service that most of them had made it through that voyage safely. And then later in 1604, Samuel de Champlain. And the beginnings of the Order of Good Cheer in Nova Scotia was all about thanksgiving for dangerous voyages that landed on safe soil. And my goodness, that turned out to be honey for many of us, but vinegar for some. Vinegar for many of the people who were already here when Frobisher and Champlain and all the rest settled in this place. One person's honey is another person's vinegar. It would appear that our viewpoint on life, our outlook, and our circumstances make a huge difference on what is in our list on Thanksgiving Sunday. And it seems to be the biggest factor in determining whether we are likely to rejoice, as Paul suggests we do, in the honey that we have been given, or scowl at the bitterness of far too much vinegar. Clearly, Thanksgiving is a time of rejoicing. And yet, what do we do with the vinegar? Do we give thanks to God for just the good parts? Do we ignore the vinegar for just this one day because, it's Thanksgiving? But, wow. Let me tell you the story of Mary Varghese. Mary Varghese was a med student and completed her qualifications in a specialty, orthopedic surgery, at the Christian Medical College in Vellore, India. She dedicated her healing skill to God. She was a faithful Christian. She said, these hands, this brain, I've been given it by God. I'm grateful for that. I have an education, and now I'm going to give my life dedicated to you, God, and for the healing of the people. And for 2 years, she worked really hard in orthopedic surgery until she was injured in a car accident. And when she regained consciousness, she was told that not only would she never walk again, but from here down was immobile. She was left able to move her head, able to move her arms and hands, and that's about it. Well, as she began to recover from the immediate physical trauma of that experience, she was in hospital the whole time, and she watched, this is in India, she watched around her so many people who were struggling with what was then called leprosy. And she heard of a technique of a French surgeon who had developed ways of grafting tendons and transforming what had become wasted stumps of leprosy patients into something that resembled hands and feet. Reconstructive surgery. And so, at her insistence and against the better advice of others, she had 3 surgeries that allowed her to sit upright and stable in her wheelchair. This is in the early part of the 20th century, or the first half of the 20th century. So she's sitting upright. And she began to learn about these techniques and try them with the parts of her body that could move. And try to specialize again. To use that incredible brain of hers and the parts of her that could move. And dedicate that to God again. Well, she became one of the finest surgeons in Asia, specializing in hand and foot reconstruction that she never would have thought of or even have access to were it not for the cruel tragedy that deprived her of so much. Now that's part of the miracle. That's part of it. But probably even a larger part of it was her physical presence in her wheelchair through the halls of the hospital, and the new light of life that would emerge in her fellow patients and fellow workers in the hospital as they watched her move around the hospital. More paralyzed than most of them, she had, well, by most people's assessment, far more vinegar than honey. Vinegar in ladles and honeys in teaspoons. But somehow, her very weakness became a channel through which the healing work was able to flow. So like the people of Israel, like the dear God she served, the vinegar and honey were combined into some offering of thanksgiving, which became, in our Christian language, the bread of life for the world. I mean, that's Jesus' phrase. That the bread of God is that which comes from the heart of God and gives life to the world. And for Mary Varghese, and for the rest of us, the bread is not likely to be all honey, all sweetness. It's likely to be a mix of the bitter and the sweet. Sometimes in teaspoonfuls, sometimes in ladlefuls, sometimes one and sometimes the other. But on this Thanksgiving Sunday, we offer to God and the world the work of our hands and our lives that are a mingling of vinegar and honey. And we give thanks for the whole lot. For we know that it is in that kind of a thank offering, it's when we place our whole lot before God, that we and these gifts and struggles are transformed and become the bread of life for the world. So as you gather around a table, we did it yesterday, but you'll probably do it today or tomorrow. There will be many flavors. Some of them sweet, some of them bitter. And as you give thanks, may you know the blessing of your whole life, the honey and the vinegar, and may you give thanks. Amen.